The WWE Universe witnessed an absolute eruption of violence on SmackDown that left everyone in complete shock as Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed unleashed a brutal assault on Paul Heyman that will be talked about for years to come. If you want to stay updated on all the jaw-dropping moments and backstage chaos happening in WWE, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss a single second of what's coming next. The entire arena fell silent when Bron Breakker's music hit and he stormed down to the ring with a look of pure rage etched across his face. This wasn't the calculated entrance fans had grown accustomed to seeing from the former NXT champion. Something had snapped inside him and everyone watching could sense that something catastrophic was about to unfold right before their eyes. The tension in the building reached fever pitch as Breakker grabbed a microphone and began pacing back and forth like a caged animal ready to break free and cause destruction. Breakker didn't waste any time with pleasantries or his usual intimidating promos. He called out Paul Heyman directly and demanded that the wise man come out to face him immediately. The crowd erupted with a mixture of excitement and concern because everyone knew that Paul Heyman rarely appeared without backup and protection from his clients. But this time felt different. The desperation and anger in Breakker's voice suggested that this confrontation had been building for weeks and tonight was the night everything would explode. Paul Heyman emerged at the top of the ramp looking noticeably uncomfortable and nervous as he held his phone to his ear while simultaneously trying to maintain his composure. The special counsel to Roman Reigns attempted to talk his way out of the situation using his legendary gift of manipulation and smooth talking that had gotten him out of countless dangerous situations throughout his career. Heyman reminded Breakker of who he represented and the power he wielded within the WWE hierarchy, but his words seemed to fall on completely deaf ears. Breakker started advancing up the ramp toward Heyman with methodical and terrifying precision. Every step he took forward caused Heyman to take 2 steps backward as the panic became more visible on his face. The wise man kept pleading for Breakker to think about the consequences of his actions and what would happen if he laid hands on someone as connected and influential as Paul Heyman. But rational thinking had left the building and Breakker was operating on pure instinct and fury that couldn't be reasoned with. Just when it seemed like Heyman might escape through the curtain and avoid the confrontation altogether, the Titantron lit up with footage from backstage showing Bronson Reed standing in front of the exit blocking any possible escape route. The massive Australian powerhouse stood with his arms crossed and a sinister smile spread across his face as he slowly shook his head back and forth indicating that there would be no running away tonight. Heyman turned around to see Breakker still approaching from the front and then looked back to see his exit blocked by Reed creating the perfect trap with absolutely no way out. The crowd was on their feet screaming and cheering as they realized they were about to witness something truly special unfold. Heyman's eyes darted back and forth between both superstars as he desperately tried to figure out any possible escape route that might save him from the beating that was clearly coming his way. He held up his hands in surrender and tried one last time to negotiate his way out of the situation by offering Breakker and Reed whatever they wanted, including championship opportunities and main event spots. Bronson Reed emerged from behind the curtain and started walking down the ramp toward Heyman from behind while Breakker continued his approach from the front. The two powerhouses had Heyman completely surrounded with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The fear on Heyman's face was genuine as he dropped to his knees and started begging for mercy while the crowd's reaction grew louder and more intense with each passing second. Breakker reached Heyman first and grabbed him by the collar, yanking him up to his feet with one powerful motion. The look of terror in Heyman's eyes was unlike anything fans had ever seen from the usually confident and composed special counsel. Reed came up from behind and the two superstars exchanged a knowing glance before simultaneously launching their attack on the defenseless Heyman. Breakker delivered a thunderous clothesline that sent Heyman crashing down onto the steel ramp with a sickening thud that echoed throughout the arena. Before Heyman could even attempt to crawl away or protect himself, Bronson Reed grabbed him by the back of his suit jacket and deadlifted him into the air like he weighed absolutely nothing. Reed positioned Heyman on his shoulders and walked him toward the edge of the stage while the crowd gasped in anticipation of what was about to happen next. Security officials and referees started rushing out from backstage trying to intervene and stop the assault before it went too far, but Breakker stood in their way and prevented anyone from getting close enough to help. Reed launched Heyman off his shoulders with a devastating Samoan drop that sent the wise man crashing through a section of equipment and staging materials that were set up near the entrance ramp. The sound of the impact was absolutely brutal and several members of the audience covered their mouths in shock at the sheer violence they had just witnessed. Medical personnel immediately tried to rush to Heyman's aid, but Breakker physically stopped them and shoved them out of the way, making it clear that they weren't finished with their victim yet. Bron Breakker reached into the wreckage and pulled Heyman out by his arm, dragging him back toward the main part of the ramp like a predator dragging its prey. Heyman's suit was torn and his face was already showing signs of bruising and swelling from the initial assault. He tried weakly to plead for mercy and beg them to stop, but his words were barely audible over the deafening reaction from the crowd who were witnessing one of the most vicious beatdowns in recent SmackDown history. Breakker hoisted Heyman up onto his shoulders in a powerslam position and charged toward the ring post on the outside of the ring. He drove Heyman's spine first into the unforgiving steel with such force that the entire ring shook from the impact. Heyman crumpled to the floor in obvious agony, clutching his back and writhing in pain while Reed circled around looking for his next opportunity to inflict more damage. Bronson Reed picked up the steel ring steps and held them high above his head, showcasing his incredible strength while the crowd roared their approval. He positioned himself near where Heyman was laying helpless on the ground and prepared to bring the steps crashing down. At the last possible second, Breakker held up his hand, stopping Reed and indicating that he had something else in mind. The two powerhouses communicated without words, and whatever they had planned was clearly going to be even more devastating than what had already transpired. They worked together to roll Heyman into the ring and followed him inside as the assault continued in front of the capacity crowd. Breakker lifted Heyman up and planted him with a vicious spinebuster in the center of the ring that left the wise man gasping for air and barely conscious. Reed climbed to the top rope and signaled for his signature tsunami splash while the arena exploded with anticipation. The massive superstar launched himself off the top rope and came crashing down on Heyman with all of his weight driving every bit of air out of his victim's lungs. Security and officials finally managed to slide into the ring and create a barrier between the attackers and their victim, but the damage had already been done. Paramedics rushed to check on Heyman, who was completely motionless in the ring, while Breakker and Reed stood tall over him with satisfied expressions on their faces. The two powerhouses raised each other's arms in victory, celebrating the destruction they had just caused, while the commentary team frantically tried to explain what had just happened and why. The camera zoomed in on Heyman's battered face as medical personnel carefully placed a neck brace on him and prepared to stretcher him out of the ring. His eyes were glazed over and he appeared to be barely conscious as they loaded him onto the backboard and began the careful process of transporting him to the back for immediate medical attention. The crowd gave a surprisingly respectful reaction as Heyman was carried past them, showing that despite being associated with some of WWE's most hated heels, people still recognized the severity of what had just occurred. Backstage footage showed Breakker and Reed walking through the curtain laughing and congratulating each other on their successful attack. When asked by a backstage interviewer why they targeted Paul Heyman so viciously, Breakker simply stated that Heyman had been pulling strings and manipulating situations behind the scenes for far too long, and someone needed to send a message that his protection was no longer guaranteed. Reed added that this was just the beginning and anyone associated with Heyman should watch their back because they weren't finished making statements. The rest of the SmackDown roster seemed genuinely shaken by what they had witnessed, and several superstars were shown watching monitors backstage with concerned expressions. Some wrestlers nodded in approval, suggesting that Heyman had made enemies throughout the locker room with his scheming and manipulations. Others looked worried, knowing that if two superstars could coordinate such a brutal assault without any apparent consequences, it could set a dangerous precedent for the future. SmackDown general manager Nick Aldis was shown in his office frantically making phone calls and trying to figure out how to handle the situation. He was heard mentioning suspensions and possible firings, but also acknowledged that both Breakker and Reed were incredibly valuable assets to the brand and any punishment would need to be carefully considered. The political chess game that was unfolding behind the scenes added another layer of intrigue to an already explosive situation. Updates throughout the night indicated that Paul Heyman had been transported to a local medical facility for evaluation and treatment. Reports suggested he had sustained multiple injuries, including possible fractured ribs, severe bruising, and a potential concussion from the repeated impacts. The severity of the attack couldn't be understated, and questions immediately began swirling about who would seek revenge on Heyman's behalf and when that retaliation would come. The Bloodline's reaction became the focal point of speculation as everyone wondered how Roman Reigns and Solo Sikoa would respond to their special counsel being attacked so brutally. Heyman had been the voice and strategist for the most dominant faction in WWE history, and an attack on him was essentially a declaration of war against everyone he represented. Social media exploded with theories about potential matches and confrontations that could stem from this single violent incident. The final segment of SmackDown featured Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed standing in the ring together, issuing an open challenge to anyone who had a problem with what they did. They declared themselves as the new force to be reckoned with on SmackDown and stated that their partnership was built on mutual respect and a shared desire to destroy anyone who stood in their way. The confidence and chemistry between the two superstars suggested this alliance wasn't just a one-time situation, but rather the formation of a potentially dominant tag team or faction. As the show came to a close, one final backstage segment showed Paul Heyman being loaded into an ambulance while clutching his ribs and struggling to breathe. His usually pristine appearance was completely destroyed, with his suit torn and his face showing visible signs of the beating he had endured. The image of such a powerful figure reduced to such a vulnerable state served as a stark reminder that in WWE, no one is truly safe from violence, no matter how protected they might seem. The ramifications of this attack will undoubtedly play out over the coming weeks and months as alliances shift, revenge plots are hatched, and the landscape of SmackDown is forever altered by the actions of Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed. If you want to stay ahead of all the developments and never miss a moment of the chaos that's sure to follow, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you can get instant updates on everything happening in the world of WWE.